Imagine walking through one of the busiest intersections on Earth. Neon lights stretch into the sky. Bullet trains arrive within seconds of schedule. Robots greet customers. Millions of people move in perfect rhythm, yet almost no one crashes into each other.
This is Tokyo.
But just a few centuries ago, none of this existed. There were no skyscrapers, no trains, no electricity, just a small fishing village surrounded by marshland. So how did this forgotten corner of Japan become the technological capital of the modern world? The answer involves samurai, devastating earthquakes, firestorms, economic miracles, and one of history's greatest rebuilding efforts. This is the extraordinary story of Tokyo. Long before Tokyo became a forest of glass, steel, and electric light, there was no city here carrying that name. The area was part of Musashi Province, a wide region surrounding what is now Tokyo Bay. Small communities lived beside rivers and wetlands, surviving through fishing, farming, and local trade. The coastline looked very different from the one we know today. Much of modern central Tokyo was underwater, covered by shallow sections of the bay, while other parts consisted of marshes and unstable ground. The settlement that stood here was called Edo. The name probably referred to an entrance to a river or bay. It was a useful location, but it was not an important center of power. Kyoto was the ancient imperial capital, where the emperor lived. Osaka was growing into a center of commerce. Other Japanese cities possessed famous temples, established markets, and powerful families. Edo had fishing boats, mud, and wetlands. It seemed like an unlikely place from which to control an entire country. But in the 15th century, a military commander named Otodoken constructed a castle on elevated ground overlooking the surrounding plain. It was known as Edo Castle. The castle gave the settlement some strategic importance, but Edo remained small. Its population was limited, its roads were poor, and large parts of the surrounding land were difficult to build upon. Then, in 1590, a powerful warlord arrived. His name was Tokugawa Ieyasu. Japan was still trapped in the final years of a long age of civil war. Rival clans had spent generations fighting for territory, influence, and control. Ieyasu had been granted authority over the region surrounding Edo. To some, this may have looked like an attempt to send him away from the wealthier and more politically important parts of Japan. But Ieyasu saw something others had missed. Edo was underdeveloped, but that meant it could be redesigned. It had access to the sea. Rivers could be used to transport food, timber, stone, and people. The surrounding plain offered enormous room for expansion, and because the settlement was far from the traditional centers of power, Ieyasu could transform it into a city built around his own authority. When he first entered Edo Castle, he found a small and badly maintained fortress surrounded by marshes and fishing communities. He immediately began rebuilding it. The castle was expanded, rivers were redirected, marshes were drained, canals were dug through the settlement, hills were cut down, and their soil used to fill sections of the bay. Land that had previously been underwater slowly became part of the growing city. Tokyo's transformation, therefore, did not begin with robots, electronics, or bullet trains. It began with shovels, canals, and thousands of laborers moving enormous quantities of earth. In 1600, Tokugawa Ieyasu defeated his main rivals at the Battle of Sekigahara. 3 years later, he was given the title of shogun. The emperor remained in Kyoto, but real political power was now controlled by the Tokugawa military government in Edo. The small fishing settlement had become the administrative center of Japan. For the next 2.5 centuries, the Tokugawa shoguns ruled from Edo Castle. But controlling Japan required much more than a castle. The new government needed roads, bridges, warehouses, markets, canals, temples, and homes. It needed water systems capable of supporting a rapidly growing population. Thousands of samurai, officials, servants, craftsmen, and merchants moved into Edo. The city expanded outward from the castle. The areas closest to the fortress were occupied by the Tokugawa family, government officials, and powerful regional lords. Farther away, districts developed for merchants, artisans, and ordinary workers. Canals became the arteries of the city. Rice arrived by boat and was stored in enormous warehouses. Timber floated downriver. Food, construction materials, and manufactured goods moved through waterways extending deep into the urban center. Before Edo had trains or paved highways, it already possessed a sophisticated transportation network. The city was being organized like a machine. One government policy played an especially important role in Edo's explosive growth. Powerful regional lords, known as daimyo, were required to divide their time between their own territories and Edo. This system was known as alternate attendance. Each daimyo had to maintain an expensive residence in the city. His wife and heirs usually remained there, effectively serving as political hostages who guaranteed his loyalty to the shogun. When a lord traveled to Edo, he did not arrive alone. He came with large processions of samurai officials, servants, and workers. Some processions contained hundreds or even thousands of people. These households needed homes, food, clothing, equipment, and entertainment. The daimyo were forced to spend enormous amounts of money maintaining their residences and traveling back and forth across Japan. This weakened their ability to challenge the shogunate, but it also directed wealth toward Edo. Merchants opened new shops. Craftsmen produced swords, clothing, furniture, and household goods. Restaurants, inns, and entertainment districts appeared. Roads connecting Edo to distant provinces became increasingly busy. By the early 18th century, Edo had grown into one of the largest cities on Earth, with a population that may have exceeded 1 million. A settlement that had once seemed insignificant had become larger than London or Paris. Yet Edo was not simply a city of government officials and samurai. It developed a culture of its own. The official social hierarchy placed warriors above farmers, craftsmen, and merchants. Merchants were considered socially inferior because they supposedly produced nothing themselves. In reality, many merchants became extremely wealthy. They financed theaters, restaurants, artists, publishers, and entertainment districts. Their money helped create a vibrant popular culture that was very different from the formal world of the samurai elite. Kabuki theaters attracted enormous crowds. Performers became celebrities. Printed books and illustrations circulated throughout the city. Woodblock artists produced images of actors, landscapes, beautiful people, famous restaurants, and scenes from everyday life. These images became known as ukiyo-e, or pictures of the floating world. The floating world represented entertainment, fashion, and temporary pleasure. It was a place where people could escape the rigid rules of social rank. Edo became a city filled with storytellers, artists, actors, and consumers. Its people followed trends, visited festivals, and argued about famous performers in much the same way people now argue about celebrities online, except with fewer strangers threatening one another over fictional characters. Literacy was relatively widespread. Schools taught children reading, writing, and arithmetic. Publishers produced guidebooks, maps, novels, and news sheets. Edo was crowded, educated, and commercially active, but it was also dangerously fragile. Most buildings were constructed from wood, bamboo, and paper. Cooking and heating depended on open flames. Streets were narrow and houses stood close together. A single accident could become a city-wide disaster. Fires occurred so frequently that they were sometimes called the flowers of Edo. The phrase sounds elegant until one remembers that these particular flowers were made from people's homes, possessions, and entire neighborhoods. One of the worst disasters occurred in 1657, when the Great Fire of Meiji swept through the city. Strong winds carried the flames across densely populated districts. Much of Edo was destroyed, and tens of thousands of people were killed. After the disaster, the government widened some roads, relocated temples, and created open areas intended to slow future fires. Fire brigades were organized, especially among the city's common residents. Watchtowers were built. Firemen became popular public figures known for their courage and distinctive uniforms. Yet fires remained part of life. People understood that their homes might not stand forever. Shops, houses, and entire streets could disappear overnight and be rebuilt soon afterward. This created a culture of recovery. Long before Tokyo faced earthquakes and wartime bombing, Edo had already learned how to rebuild itself again and again. While the city continued growing, Japan followed a policy that severely restricted foreign contact. Foreign missionaries had previously entered the country, and Japanese leaders feared that Christianity and European influence could be used to undermine political control. Most Europeans were expelled. Japanese people were generally forbidden from traveling overseas. Foreign trade was limited to carefully controlled locations and groups. This period is often described as complete isolation, but Japan was never entirely cut off from the outside world. Trade continued with China and Korea. The Dutch were allowed to maintain a small trading post at Nagasaki. Through Dutch books and imported instruments, Japanese scholars studied medicine, astronomy, mathematics, geography, and engineering. This field became known as Dutch learning. The knowledge remained limited to a small part of society, but it gave Japan some understanding of Western science and technology before the country fully reopened. For more than 200 years, the Tokugawa government maintained internal peace. Then, in 1853, strange ships appeared near Edo Bay. They were large, dark, steam-powered warships commanded by the American naval officer Commodore Matthew Perry. The Japanese called them the Black Ships. Perry carried a message from the President of the United States demanding that Japan open its ports to American ships and establish formal relations. The ships were equipped with powerful cannons and engines that allowed them to move without relying entirely on wind. To Japanese observers, they represented a frightening technological gap. Western industrial powers had already used military force to dominate large parts of Asia. China had been defeated in the Opium Wars and forced to accept unequal treaties. Japan understood the warning. It could open its ports peacefully, or the foreign powers might open them by force. Perry returned the following year with a larger fleet. The Tokugawa government agreed to American demands. Other Western countries soon demanded similar treaties. Foreign merchants gained special privileges, and the Japanese government lost control over parts of its own trade system. The arrival of the black ships created a political crisis. Some groups wanted foreigners expelled. Others argued that Japan had to adopt Western technology before it could defend itself. The shogunate appeared weak and unable to protect the country. Opposition grew. In 1868, the Tokugawa government collapsed and political authority was formally restored to the emperor. This event became known as the Meiji Restoration. Edo, the city built by the shoguns, received a new name, Tokyo. The name meant Eastern Capital. The emperor moved from Kyoto into the former Edo Castle, which became the Imperial Palace. Tokyo was no longer simply the home of a military government. It was now the capital of a new Japanese nation. The leaders of the Meiji government understood that Japan faced a brutal choice. It could modernize rapidly, or it could risk being controlled and divided by foreign powers. So Japan began one of the fastest national transformations in modern history. Government officials traveled to Europe and the United States. They studied schools, factories, railways, armies, legal systems, and governments. Foreign engineers, scientists, teachers, and military advisors were invited to Japan. Young Japanese students were sent abroad to acquire knowledge that could be brought home. Tokyo became the center of this transformation. Government ministries were created. Western-style schools and universities opened. Telegraph lines connected the capital with other cities. Streets were widened and paved. Brick buildings appeared. Gas lamps illuminated parts of Tokyo at night. The Ginza district was rebuilt as a modern commercial street lined with Western-style architecture. Many of these early brick buildings were unfamiliar and expensive, and some residents disliked them. Modernization, as usual, looked magnificent in government plans and slightly more confusing when ordinary humans were expected to live inside it. In 1872, Japan's first railway opened between Shimbashi and Tokyo and the port city of Yokohama. Crowds gathered to see steam locomotives moving along metal rails. The railway transformed travel. A journey that once required hours by horse, foot, or boat could now be completed far more quickly. More lines followed. Railway stations became new centers of commerce. Businesses moved closer to them. Workers could travel farther between their homes and jobs. Time itself became more regulated. Trains required standard schedules. Factories demanded fixed working hours. Clocks began replacing the flexible rhythms of the old city. Japan also constructed modern factories, shipyards, and arsenals. At first, many were operated by the government using foreign machinery and advisors. Later, some were sold to private business families. These industrial groups would eventually grow into powerful corporations. The government introduced a national school system and compulsory education. Universities trained engineers, doctors, administrators, and scientists. The samurai class was abolished. Former warriors lost many of their traditional privileges, including the right to carry swords. Japan was trying to replace a feudal society with a modern industrial state. The change was fast and often painful. Not everyone benefited equally. Traditional communities were disrupted. Workers faced harsh factory conditions. Taxes placed pressure on farmers. But within a few decades, Japan had created railways, industries, a modern army, and a centralized government. Tokyo became the visible symbol of that change. Old wooden neighborhoods stood beside brick offices. Rickshaws shared roads with electric streetcars. People wearing traditional clothing walked beside officials dressed in Western suits. The city existed between two worlds. Japan's modernization also carried a darker purpose. The government believed that military strength was necessary for national survival. Factories produced weapons and warships. Railways moved soldiers and supplies. Schools promoted loyalty to the emperor and the state. Japan defeated China in a war during the 1890s and defeated Russia in 1905. The victory over Russia shocked the world. For the first time in the modern era, an Asian country had defeated a major European power. Japan gained international prestige, but it also began building an empire of its own. It colonized Taiwan and Korea and expanded its influence in China. Tokyo became the command center of an increasingly powerful and aggressive state. The same technology that protected Japan from foreign domination was now being used to dominate others. By the early 20th century, Tokyo had grown into a modern industrial capital. Electricity-powered streetlights and factories. Streetcars carried passengers across the city. Telephone lines connected businesses and government offices. Western-style banks, department stores, and public buildings appeared. Then, just before noon on September 1st, 1923, the ground began to move. A massive earthquake struck the Kanto region. Buildings shook violently, roofs collapsed, roads split apart, railway tracks twisted. The earthquake occurred close to lunchtime when thousands of cooking fires were burning. Within minutes, fires broke out across Tokyo and Yokohama. Water pipes had ruptured, leaving firefighters without enough water. Strong winds pushed the flames through wooden neighborhoods. Individual fires combined into enormous walls of heat and smoke. People fled toward parks, rivers, and open ground. Many carried furniture, bedding, and possessions that blocked already crowded streets. In some locations, people gathered in open spaces believing they were safe, only to be surrounded by fire. Fire tornadoes formed as hot air rose and violent winds pulled flames through the city. Tokyo burned for days. The Great Kanto earthquake killed or left missing more than 100,000 people across the region. Hundreds of thousands of homes were destroyed. The disaster also unleashed fear and violence. False rumors spread claiming that Korean residents were poisoning wells, starting fires, and planning attacks. Vigilante groups murdered Korean civilians. Chinese residents and even some Japanese people mistaken for Koreans were also killed. The disaster revealed how quickly fear could turn into hatred when authorities failed to stop rumors. Tokyo had been physically shattered, and part of its society had collapsed with it. But once again, the city began rebuilding. Urban planners saw an opportunity to construct a safer and more organized capital. They proposed wider roads, stronger bridges, public parks, modern sewers, and buildings made from reinforced concrete. Some roads were designed to serve as fire breaks. Parks could become evacuation areas during future disasters. The government wanted to reorganize entire districts, but many plans were reduced because of financial limits and opposition from property owners. Even so, reconstruction changed the city. Modern bridges crossed the Sumida River. New government buildings appeared. Concrete schools were designed to resist both earthquakes and fires. In 1927, only 4 years after the disaster, Tokyo opened Asia's first underground railway. The first section connected Asakusa and Ueno. Crowds arrived to experience traveling beneath the city. The subway represented something larger than transportation. Tokyo had not simply rebuilt what had existed before. It had begun constructing a new kind of city, but the period of reconstruction was followed by political instability. During the 1930s, Japan's military gained increasing influence over the government. The country expanded its war in China and continued building an empire across Asia. Tokyo's factories produced weapons, vehicles, and machinery. Government ministries directed the war effort. Newspapers and radio broadcasts spread propaganda. Political opposition was suppressed. Citizens were expected to serve the state without question. In 1941, Japan attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor and entered a wider war against the United States and its allies. At first, Japanese forces captured enormous territories across Asia and the Pacific. But the war gradually turned against Japan. American submarines disrupted shipping. Fuel and food became scarce. Japanese cities came within range of long-distance bombers. By 1944, American B-29 aircraft had begun attacking Tokyo. The city's wooden neighborhoods made it extremely vulnerable to incendiary bombs. Then came the night of March 9, 1945. Hundreds of bombers approached Tokyo at low altitude. Instead of focusing only on military factories, the aircraft dropped incendiary bombs over densely populated areas of eastern Tokyo. Thousands of small fires erupted. The flames spread from house to house, street to street. Strong winds combined them into a firestorm. The heat became so intense that metal melted and glass shattered. People who jumped into rivers and canals were boiled, burned, or suffocated by smoke. Families became separated in the darkness. Roads were blocked by crowds. People searched for any open space where they could escape the flames. By the following morning, a huge part of Tokyo had disappeared. More than 100,000 people may have died in a single night. Around 1 million were left homeless. Further bombing raids continued during the final months of the war. By August 1945, large areas of Tokyo had been reduced to rubble and ash. Japan had caused enormous destruction across Asia. Millions had suffered under Japanese occupation and warfare. The devastation of Tokyo did not erase those crimes. But for ordinary civilians trapped in the burning city, the war had become immediate and personal. Their homes, families, and neighborhoods were gone. After atomic bombs destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the Soviet Union entered the war against Japan, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The war ended. Tokyo was defeated, damaged, and exhausted. Its population had fallen dramatically as residents were killed, evacuated, or displaced. Photographs from the period show empty landscapes where dense neighborhoods once stood. Survivors built temporary shelters from scrap wood, metal sheets, and pieces of destroyed buildings. Food was scarce. People traded clothes and household possessions for rice. Black markets appeared around railway stations, selling food and goods outside official rationing systems. Children lived among ruins. The city that would later become famous for electronic screens and spotless trains was struggling simply to feed its population. Japan came under Allied occupation, led primarily by the United States. The military was dismantled. War crimes trials were conducted. A new constitution was introduced, limiting the role of the emperor and renouncing war as a national right. Women gained voting rights. Land reforms weakened powerful landlords. Labor unions expanded. Large industrial groups were reorganized, although many companies survived in new forms. Tokyo became the headquarters of the occupation and the center of a completely transformed political system. At first, recovery was slow. Factories lacked equipment and raw materials. Homes and infrastructure had to be rebuilt. Inflation reduced the value of money. But the beginning of the Cold War changed Japan's position. The United States increasingly viewed Japan not as a defeated enemy, but as a valuable ally against communist expansion in Asia. Then, in 1950, the Korean War began. American forces required uniforms, vehicles, machinery, repairs, and supplies. Japanese factories received large orders. Production increased. Workers were hired. Money entered the economy. The Korean War gave Japan's recovery a powerful boost. But outside demand alone does not explain what followed. Japan invested heavily in education, infrastructure, and manufacturing. Government ministries worked closely with private companies. Businesses imported foreign technology and licensed designs from American and European firms. Japanese engineers studied these technologies carefully. Then they improved them. Factories introduced systems designed to reduce errors and waste. Companies emphasized quality control, long-term planning, and constant refinement. Workers, engineers, managers, and suppliers cooperated to improve production. The goal was not always to invent something completely new. It was often to take an existing product and make it smaller, more affordable, more reliable, and easier to produce. Tokyo became the administrative and financial center of this economic transformation. Banks financed growing companies. Universities trained skilled workers. Government ministries coordinated industrial policy. Corporate headquarters filled central districts. People moved from rural communities toward Tokyo in search of factory and office jobs. The city expanded far beyond its old boundaries. New suburbs appeared in the surrounding prefectures of Kanagawa, Saitama, and Chiba. Millions of people now lived outside central Tokyo, but traveled into it each day. This created one of the most important features of the modern city, its railway system. Private railway companies built lines connecting the center with growing suburbs, but they did not only operate trains. They also developed housing, department stores, entertainment areas, and shopping districts around their stations. More houses created more passengers. More shops attracted more visitors. The railway and the neighborhood grew together. As a result, stations became the centers of urban life. A major Tokyo station was not simply a platform. It could contain restaurants, shops, offices, underground streets, and connections to several different railway lines. Neighborhoods developed around these transport hubs. Tokyo became a city with many centers rather than one single downtown area. Shinjuku, Shibuya, Ikebukuro, Ueno, Tokyo Station, and other districts each became major destinations. This allowed the city to spread crowds across different areas. Tokyo's organization did not depend on having fewer people. It depended on moving enormous numbers of people through systems operating with remarkable frequency and coordination. By the late 1950s, Japan's economy was growing rapidly. Factories produced steel, ships, chemicals, machinery, and consumer goods. Families who had once struggled to obtain food began purchasing televisions, washing machines, and refrigerators. These products changed everyday life and became symbols of a growing middle class. Then Tokyo was selected to host the 1964 Summer Olympic Games. For Japan, the Olympics were more than a sporting event. They were an opportunity to show the world that the defeated country of 1945 had returned as a modern, peaceful, and technologically advanced nation. Tokyo began another massive construction program. Roads were widened, expressways were built above rivers and canals, railway stations were expanded, hotels and sporting facilities appeared across the city. Haneda Airport was connected to central Tokyo by monorail. New sewage systems improved sanitation, and just days before the Olympic Games began, Japan introduced its most famous technological achievement, the Shinkansen. The first bullet train began operating between Tokyo and Osaka in October 1964. Its smooth shape and high speed captured global attention. It dramatically reduced travel time between Japan's two largest urban regions. But the bullet train was more than a fast vehicle. It became a symbol of national recovery. 19 years earlier, Tokyo had been burned and defeated. Now it was sending trains across the country at speeds the world had rarely seen in regular passenger service. Television broadcasts showed international audiences a city filled with modern roads, stations, stadiums, and technology. Tokyo was no longer presented as a landscape of ruins. It had become the face of a new Japan. Rapid growth continued through the 1960s and early 1970s. But progress came with serious costs. Factories released chemicals into rivers and air. Vehicle exhaust created smog. Industrial waste damaged communities and caused severe illnesses in different parts of Japan. Tokyo's rivers became polluted and the city's air quality declined. Housing shortages forced many families into small and crowded homes. Commuters traveled long distances on packed trains. Economic growth had made Japan wealthier, but it had not automatically made life comfortable. Public anger pushed the government to introduce stronger environmental regulations. Factories adopted cleaner technologies. Vehicle standards improved. Wastewater treatment expanded. Tokyo gradually became cleaner. Once again, the city did not advance by avoiding problems. It advanced after the problems became too large and poisonous to ignore, which is humanity's favorite method of long-term planning. In 1973, an international oil crisis caused energy prices to rise sharply. Japan depended heavily on imported fuel, and its industries were vulnerable. Companies responded by improving energy efficiency and shifting toward products that required fewer raw materials but contained more advanced technology. Electronics became increasingly important. One Tokyo district came to represent this new age: Akihabara. After the Second World War, Akihabara became known for shops selling radio parts and electrical components. As Japanese families began purchasing household appliances, the district filled with televisions, refrigerators, washing machines, and audio equipment. Later, its stores began selling calculators, cameras, computers, video games, and specialized electronic parts. Akihabara became a place where consumers could see products that seemed to belong to the future. Japanese companies became famous for producing compact and reliable technology. Portable radios allowed people to carry entertainment outside the home. Smaller televisions and cameras reached international markets. In 1979, Sony released the Walkman. The portable cassette player changed the way people experienced music. Music was no longer tied to a room, car, or large stereo system. It could travel with one person through the streets. Companies such as Sony, Panasonic, Toshiba, Canon, Nikon, Hitachi, and Sharp became recognized around the world. Japanese car manufacturers such as Toyota, Honda, and Nissan also expanded internationally. Their vehicles developed reputations for efficiency and reliability. Not all these companies were headquartered entirely within Tokyo, but the capital concentrated the banks, media networks, advertisers, government agencies, and corporate offices supporting their growth. Tokyo became the stage on which Japan displayed its technological identity. By the 1980s, the city seemed unstoppable. Japan had become one of the largest economies in the world. Its cars, cameras, televisions, and audio equipment were sold across the globe. Japanese businesses purchased famous properties and companies overseas. Stock prices increased rapidly. Property values rose to astonishing levels. Land in central Tokyo became some of the most expensive on Earth. Companies borrowed heavily because they believed property and stock prices would continue rising forever. Money flowed through the city. Luxury stores filled Ginza. New office towers changed the skyline. Restaurants and entertainment districts flourished. Neon advertisements covered buildings. International visitors saw a city that seemed richer, faster, and more technologically advanced than almost anywhere else. Tokyo began influencing science fiction. Its elevated expressways, crowded streets, glowing signs, and electronic markets inspired filmmakers, writers, and artists. The city became closely associated with cyberpunk visions of the future. For many people outside Japan, Tokyo was not simply a modern city, it was what all cities might eventually become. But beneath the confidence was an enormous financial bubble. Property prices had risen far beyond the real value of the land. Companies and individuals had taken on huge debts. At the end of the 1980s, the government tightened financial policy in an attempt to control speculation. The bubble burst. Stock prices collapsed. Property values fell. Banks were left with enormous loans that could not be repaid. Businesses reduced investment. Consumers became cautious. The period of seemingly endless growth came to an end. Japan entered what became known as the Lost Decades. Economic growth remained weak. Prices stagnated or fell. Companies that had once appeared capable of conquering global markets became defensive. Employment also changed. The earlier system had offered many workers stable jobs and long careers within one company. Younger generations increasingly faced temporary contracts, lower wages, and less security. Tokyo remained rich and highly developed, but the feeling of unstoppable progress had disappeared. Other countries began challenging Japan's technological position. South Korea, Taiwan, and China became major manufacturing centers. American companies dominated software, personal computing, and later the internet economy. Japan remained powerful in industries such as automobiles, machinery, robotics, and specialized components, but it no longer appeared certain to lead every technology of the future. This created one of the most curious contradictions in modern Tokyo. The city can appear years ahead and decades behind at exactly the same time. A passenger can travel through one of the world's most advanced railway systems, buy a meal from an automated machine, and enter an earthquake-resistant skyscraper. Then that same person may walk into an office where documents still have to be printed, stamped, and sent by fax. Apparently, a society can build a bullet train but still remain emotionally attached to paperwork. Yet Tokyo's real technological achievement was never simply the number of gadgets visible in its shops. Its greatest achievement was the organization of the city itself. Tokyo's railway network includes public operators, private companies, subway lines, and regional services. Millions of passengers transfer between them every day. Trains arrive frequently enough that many people do not need to check schedules in advance. Platforms are marked to show where doors will open. Signs guide passengers through enormous stations. Staff members manage crowds during delays and emergencies. The network is not perfect. Rush hour trains can be painfully crowded, and even small disruptions can affect thousands of passengers. But the system allows one of the world's largest urban populations to move without depending entirely on private cars. Technology also operates quietly throughout daily life. Convenience stores receive several deliveries each day, allowing small shops to offer fresh meals without large storage areas. Advanced logistics systems track what products sell at different locations and times. Vending machines operate across the city, selling drinks, snacks, and other products. Buildings use automated systems to manage lighting, security, temperature, and energy consumption. Waste collection follows detailed local schedules. Residents are expected to separate different types of rubbish. And because Tokyo stands in one of the most earthquake-prone regions on Earth, modern construction follows strict safety standards. Tall buildings are designed to move during earthquakes rather than resist every force rigidly. Some structures use dampers that absorb motion. Others use base isolation systems that separate the building from movement in the ground. Sensors can detect the first waves of an earthquake and send warnings before the stronger shaking arrives. Phones display emergency alerts. Trains can stop automatically. Industrial systems can shut down to prevent fires and accidents. The warnings may provide only a few seconds, but those seconds can save lives. Tokyo also contains enormous underground systems designed to control flooding. Tunnels, reservoirs, and pumping facilities redirect stormwater away from vulnerable neighborhoods. The city cannot eliminate natural disasters. Earthquakes, typhoons, floods, and fires remain serious threats. But Tokyo treats preparation as part of ordinary life. Schools and workplaces conduct earthquake drills. Emergency supplies are stored. Evacuation areas are clearly marked. This attitude was not created by futuristic technology. It was created by memory. The fires of Edo taught the city that entire neighborhoods could disappear. The earthquake of 1923 taught it that infrastructure could fail within minutes. The bombing of 1945 showed what happened when destruction reached an unimaginable scale. Every disaster influenced the city that followed. Building codes changed. Roads were widened. Parks became evacuation zones. Emergency systems improved. Modern Tokyo was built not despite its disasters, but partly because of the lessons they forced it to learn. The city is now frequently described as the largest metropolitan area in the world. But Tokyo does not feel like one single center spreading endlessly in every direction. Instead, it operates through many connected districts. Shinjuku contains office towers, government buildings, railway stations, and entertainment streets. Shibuya is associated with youth culture, fashion, media, and its enormous pedestrian crossing. Ginza is known for luxury stores and department buildings. Marunouchi, near Tokyo Station, contains banks and corporate headquarters. Asakusa preserves temples, festivals, and traces of the older city. Akihabara remains associated with electronics, gaming, anime, and specialized popular culture. Each district has a different character. Many function almost like separate cities, linked together by rail. This structure allows Tokyo to spread employment, shopping, and entertainment across several centers. Not everyone must travel to the same location. The result is an urban system capable of absorbing extraordinary numbers of people. But Tokyo is not a perfect city. Its trains can be exhausting during rush hour. Homes are often small and expensive. Long commutes reduce the time people spend with their families. Japan's work culture has become associated with long hours, stress, and pressure to place the company above personal life. The population is aging, while fewer children are being born. This creates labor shortages and increases pressure on healthcare and pension systems. Younger residents may struggle with unstable jobs and the high cost of raising a family. Despite the city's enormous population, many people experience loneliness and social isolation. Bright lights, clean streets, and advanced machines do not automatically create a happy society. Tokyo's order also depends on strong social expectations. People wait in lines, keep their voices low on trains, remove their rubbish, and try not to inconvenience strangers. This cooperation helps the city function, but the pressure to follow social rules can also become restrictive. People may avoid expressing disagreement or asking for help because they fear burdening others. Tokyo is therefore not a perfect city from the future. It is a human city, and humans have an impressive ability to carry old problems into even the most advanced environments. Yet perhaps Tokyo's greatest strength lies in its ability to combine change with continuity. Ancient shrines stand beside glass towers. Traditional wooden homes survive beneath elevated railway tracks. Religious festivals move through streets filled with convenience stores and electronic screens. People visit temples during holidays, then return home on high-speed trains. The past was not completely erased when Edo became Tokyo. It remains hidden within the structure of the modern city. The Imperial Palace stands where Edo Castle once controlled the country. Old canals influence the routes of modern roads and railways. District names preserve the memory of craftsmen, merchants, and samurai families who disappeared centuries ago. Even the shape of Tokyo reflects its history. It was never created according to one perfect master plan. Instead, it grew in layers. A castle town was built over fishing settlements. An imperial capital was built over the castle town. A modern industrial city was built over the imperial capital. A reconstructed city emerged after the earthquake. Another city rose from the ruins of war. Railways, highways, towers, and digital networks were then placed across everything that remained. Tokyo is not one city, it is several cities occupying the same ground. And perhaps this is the real reason it became so advanced. Tokyo was never allowed to believe that its current form would last forever. Fire taught it to rebuild. Foreign pressure taught it to learn. Earthquakes taught it to redesign. War taught it to begin again. Limited land taught it to organize. Economic competition taught it to improve. The technology came from universities, factories, companies, and government investment. But the deeper foundations had been created centuries earlier, when Tokugawa Ieyasu began digging canals through wetlands and organizing an entire country around Edo Castle. Tokyo was already functioning like a machine long before electronics and computers existed. Today, visitors see bullet trains, animated screens, robots, vending machines, and towers glowing through the night. But those are only the most visible parts of the city. The real wonder lies beneath them. The tunnels, the timetables, the supply networks, the earthquake sensors, the hidden engineering, the cooperation of millions of people who wake up each morning and keep one of the most complicated urban systems ever created moving. Tokyo did not rise from nothing. It rose from water, mud, and human ambition. It rose through political power, artistic creativity, industrial growth, violence, defeat, and reconstruction. And whenever history destroyed it, Tokyo returned in a different form. Not untouched, not perfect, but larger, stronger, and better prepared for whatever came next. Perhaps that is why Tokyo still appears to belong to the future. not because it escaped the disasters of the past, but because it learned how to build the future directly on top of them.